Aloha. Ika wā māmua, ika wā māhope means to look to the future, we must look deeply to the past. 10 years ago, Oahu Economic Development Board was in a very deep crisis. Not just a crisis of funding, not just a crisis of support, but a crisis of relevancy. Today, many organizations are experiencing that same type of crisis. We collectively as an organization would like to provide the opportunity for folks maybe to find a future by looking deeply at where we were 10 years ago. When we look at the past, we're not just talking about our shallow heritage of where we come from, but really who we are. It's the same searching that I believe people are doing today in the 23andMe and the Ancestry.com. We're looking deeply back. Who are we? To find out, where do we need to go?
Being the leader of a nonprofit organization today is not easy. How do I face the challenges of our rapidly changing society? How do I lead and evolve my organization to ensure relevancy in my community? How do I engage my board, my staff, and my volunteers to embrace the changes I need to make? Thankfully, the Oahu Economic Development Board has created a television series to help. Ika wā māmua, ika wā māhope.
Thank you for joining us for the launch of this introspective and informative program here on Alelo. Ika wā māmua, ika wā māhope means to seek the future, we must look deeply to the past. In this three-part series, we'll be hearing the stories from prominent individuals in our community who also happen to serve or have served on the board of directors of the Oahu Economic Development Board, or OEDB. Their experience and insight into making significant changes to transform a struggling organization into a successful, sustainable, and self-reliant one, we think will be helpful for other companies, businesses, and nonprofits who may be going through the same challenges. So this is how the program is being presented. There are three parts. In our first segment, we'll be discussing the recognition phase, realizing you have a problem within your organization. The second part is how change is used to move forward. And in the third and final segment, creating the future. And now that you've made changes and created solutions, what's next? So let's begin. And with us, we have Corbert Matsumoto. And Corbert is the chairman and CEO of Island Insurance Company. And next we have Robbie Alm. Robbie is president of Collaborative Leaders Network and is the past chair of the OEDB board. And we have Allen Uyeda, and Allen is the former president and CEO of First Insurance Company of Hawai'i. He also served as the board chair of OEDB. And although he's retired, he's still heavily involved in the community. In the first part of our three-part series, we begin with the recognition phase. It's okay to admit your organization has struggles. The key is, what do you do about it? What is the best path forward to solve the issues your organization faces both internally and externally? Corbert, let's begin with you. Now, you recognized there was a problem in Hawaii, and in your thoughts there was a valuable philosophy that was absent and possibly being lost. What was that, and why is it so important?
Well, back when I first sort of got involved was with OEDB, and at the time it was known as Enterprise Honolulu. I didn't know much about the organization. I wasn't directly involved with it, and I only knew about it from what I read in the paper or heard about from other people. But I just looked at it as an economic development organization, like any other across the country in different cities. And I wasn't exactly enthusiastic about supporting it, because what I saw Enterprise Honolulu as doing was just touting Hawaii as a place for investors from outside of Hawaii to come and make money and do business, as opposed to a place to come and add value and make money in the process. Hawaii had been going through a number of changes over the last 2 decades, and that change has changed the fabric of the business community in Hawaii. And so to me, that was a problem, because we were losing something as the character and the face of business in Hawaii was changing. And I thought that we needed to try to move back to some of the values and philosophies that I think helped make sure that the business community was very much a supportive part of our community, that they were actually partners in helping build a stronger community. When Pono Shim first approached me to let me know that he had been approached about joining Enterprise Honolulu, I was actually quite surprised. I thought Pono, was kind of like the last person I would think that Enterprise Honolulu would be looking to bring on board. But then he explained to me that the leader at the time wanted him to come on in the role of kahu. And I was thinking, wow, that's very unusual. Mm-hmm. And so as we talked, I got a little better sense as to the fact that the organization had recognized that they needed to change. They needed to do something different. And so in my mind, I thought it was a very positive move, and that's something that would start to change the message that Enterprise Honolulu would be sending out in terms of trying to promote companies coming to Hawaii to do business.
So being a lot more collaborative, seeing themselves as a partner in the community, that's some of the philosophy that you felt needed to be emphasized?
I think it was trying to make sure that they recognize that this was not just a place for them to come and try to make profits, but this was a place that they should come to actually get involved in the community, to add value to the community itself. And it's a different kind of a perspective. I think that at one time, business used to be about providing a service, making money in the process. But of late, I think a lot of businesses are more focused on, well, can we make quarterly profits, and then can we just increase it for the next quarter? And it's not so much driven by the sense as to, what are we adding to strengthen the community in which we're engaging in business.
Do you think you started seeing some of that change in some of the businesses these days?
I think that what's happening with OEDB now is that there's an attempt to try to better educate people that are doing business in Hawaii about some of the values that I think are fundamental to building community. And to me, it's those kinds of values, if companies embrace, it'll help them make the right choices as they go about doing their business.
Do you think that's something unique to Hawaii as well? This philosophy, this idea of being a part of the community?
I think from a statewide standpoint, it is unique, because I have no doubt that in other communities, smaller communities, there's still semblances of what I'm talking about that still exists. But in larger urban centers, it increasingly has been lost. And so we still have aspects of that throughout Hawaii. And I think that we need to try to preserve that and promote that as much as possible.
Very interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much, Corbert. It's a really interesting philosophy. All right. Well, let's move on and speak with Robbie. Robbie, what were critical assessments for the future of OEDB that were important to it being potentially relevant? And this is when you became chairman. What were your what were your thoughts?
It's, as Corbett mentioned, it was Enterprise Honolulu, and originally Hawaiian Electric Industries, Hawaiian Electric, which I joined, was one of the original founders. And over time, some of the downtown community had sort of stepped aside, and part of it, I think, was because the way Enterprise Honolulu was being run by Mike Fitzgerald under Allen's leadership as board chair, it was not afraid to speak truth, even when that truth was unpopular. And I really valued that. And one of the ways they spoke truth was they talked about, hold our utilities accountable, but don't try to harm them. That harming the businesses of Hawaii wasn't helping Hawaii. Holding businesses like a public utility accountable was important. And so we continued the support of Enterprise Honolulu throughout, and really valued what Allen and Mike had built, and then Mike resigned and said he was moving back to the mainland. So at that point, kind of, where's the organization going next? And I wasn't on the board. But we were a principal funder, and I think for that reason I was asked to be on the search committee. And I couldn't make the meetings. So at the end they came and said, we have 2 candidates. You know, and one thing I knew about both is they were men of great integrity, so that, you know, the integrity part was for sure. But other than that, they were as far apart as 2 people could possibly be. One was a very distinguished retiring general in the military, someone who had served his country and served Hawaii and had decided to make his home in Hawaii after retiring from the military service. And the other was Pono Shim. And I hadn't known the general I knew a little bit about him, but you know, I knew what kind of a leader he was. And Pono, as Corbett said, very different kind of leader, steeped in Hawaiian culture, but also in the cultures of all of the other peoples who have come to Hawaii and viewing business through that lens. So, you know, I said, you know, in my estimation, if you go the conventional route, which is to pick this distinguished military leader, Enterprise Honolulu will go out of business within a couple of years. Not because of him, but because there was nothing different about the organization at that point than the Chamber of Commerce or the Business Roundtable. So what additional value would Enterprise Honolulu bring to the community if we just went the conventional route? The other choice was to go with Pono and a very unconventional approach, a far more culture and community and heritage-based approach to economic development. We could still go under. You know, there was no guarantee of success that route. In fact, the odds may have been higher against that route. Right. But at least, you know, you'd go out trying something very different that might really help Hawaii. So I said, you know, if you're asking my advice, you know, much as I respect the general, go with Pono and try something different. Try something that would say that economic development in Hawaii should have a different foundation. The other organizations in town could represent the normal kind of recruitment process, but let Enterprise Honolulu speak to something very different than that and to try to add value in a very different way. So they came back and said, okay, we'll go that route if you join the board and become chair, because Allen would like to pass the torch to somebody. So I said, sure. I mean, you know, no Pono, but I'm also someone who believes we got to go back to our roots and to who we are. And as Corbett said, we're a different, special place. And why don't we lead from that and see that as a strength? And under Pono, that's the way we're going to go. So had a blast.
And it's obviously proven to be a good move, but it was a risk. Wouldn't you say so?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I, you know, I don't know if Allen can speak to this, but we probably lost half the board. Yeah, you know, they quit. You know, they didn't. I don't think they liked the choice. I don't think they approved of taking that level of risk and how unconventional it was. And so, but then it was a golden opportunity. Allen stayed, which you know, we all really appreciated. But then we rebuilt the board around people who were willing to go a different path and look at a different way. And I think part of why OEDB is still here today is the people who signed up for a different way of looking at things.
Mm-hmm. Looking outside of the box, thinking outside of the box can sometimes
except as Corbett said, it's not really outside of the box. It's like in the way exactly the Olelo used at the beginning. It isn't. It's actually going back to who and what we are. So it wasn't actually, you know, and I appreciated the words you used to introduce it. It's like going back to our past to find our future.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Robbie. Okay, well, let's hear from Allen. And I know that you have a strong belief that Hawaii needs a special type of leadership. And what do you feel that is and why?
Well, I do feel that every organization, every community needs special leadership skills depending upon the challenges it's faced. And they change as the organization and the environment change. But I think that more fundamentally, as you heard from Corbett and Robbie, there are some fundamentals that leadership need to embrace if it's going to be effective for the long run. And I think that for leadership to be successful over time, the leaders need to be viewed with trust by their constituents, the people they serve. And in order to do that, I think the people they deal with need to understand that the leaders are committed to the values of the community that they're serving, and understand what motivates the leaders, why these people want to assume these positions of responsibility. I mean, there's a couple examples that come to mind that I think are good representations for Hawaii. One, when we were looking for a successor to Marcy Greenwood, I was chair of the roundtable, and I had an opportunity to talk to David Lasner. And I asked him, why are you interested in this job? I told him, we know you have a job opportunity where you would get more money than the president of the University of Hawaii is going to pay you. You would have a budget that could allow you to do all the technical innovation that you would be interested in, and you would have less stress, less headaches if you took this job. And he said, look, I came here when I was a young man. The university has been good to me. Gave me a lot of opportunity, let me grow and develop. He said, I thought about my other opportunity, and I realized that the difference in pay wasn't going to be what I was looking for in life. And that what I really wanted to do is help the University of Hawaii fulfill its mission for Hawaii. And we heard the search committee for the athletic director heard a very similar story from Dave Matlin when he was interviewing. He recounted, again, coming to the University of Hawaii when he was a young man, working in the ticket office, falling in love with the university. And at that point, Dave had a job a lot of people would say was a much better job than the University of Hawaii athletic director. And he was his own boss. He could control it. His quality of life could have been a lot better. But he said he actually took a weekend to think about this before he submitted his application, and realized that having the opportunity to be the athletic director was going to really fulfill some of his lifelong dreams to help the organization achieve its potential, help it live up to what many people in the community would hope it would be. And I think that both of those individuals exemplify an ability to convey to others a level of trust that they can be trusted, that their motivation is not for themselves, it's for the organization and the people they're trying to serve. And I think that's critical for every organization, as we've discussed, as we go down the road. And of course, every leader needs certain skills, certain competencies to achieve their objectives. But I think that in common, they need this level of trust.
Exactly, and I think your story is very similar to what Corbert was saying, how it's not about making money. That's not the bottom line as a leader and trying to make change, but it's a more philosophy of being a wider mission.
Right, but I also think, as Corbett said, these leaders are cognizant of the fact that organizations that exist in a commercial environment do need to provide a service that people are willing to pay for, or that the organizations are not going to be able to survive. But they realize, as Corbett said, that the profit, the sustainability is going to come because people value what the organizations are providing.
And similar to what Robbie was saying, sometimes it's taking that risk of choosing that leader that may not be your conventional person for the job, but someone who maybe has a different way of thinking. Mm-hmm. And that's okay too.
And I think that you can see in today's changing world, you need people who are willing to make those changes, because sticking with the old is not going to work. The world's changing too fast. You need people who can keep with the core values, keep with the mission, but understand technicalities of what needs to change in order to deliver the products, the services in a new way.
Do you think that you were saying that maybe this was lost somewhere along the lines in business here in Hawaii? That what happened in that time that caused people to not really focus on who we are as a community or what their mission might be, but really, what do you think happened?
I guess my opinion on that is that it has a lot to do with the fact that there became a disconnect between the leadership of the people that were actually in charge of the enterprise and the community. So as the decision makers were no longer residents of the state and this community, there's a disconnect in terms of their perspective and their understanding of the needs and what value they can add to the community. And so I think that that's one of the things that has been lost as a number of businesses have basically been acquired by outside owners. And I think that is something that we need to address, either by informing and educating the people who are actually making the decisions about the businesses that are operated here, or trying to restore community leadership.
That's a good point. A lot of the mainland ownership now is a big part of many of these companies.
Well, not just mainland, but from
yeah,
all parts
global,
of the world.
Global.
Right?
You're right. You're right.
And they tend to themselves be very impersonal because they're funds. They're not necessarily corporations. And so they have different motivations and objectives and processes by which they decide and make choices.
But I think the world is also starting to recognize that this is a problem, not just for Hawaii, but for the world. And you hear more and more organizations talking about corporate social responsibility. And corporations coming to understand the importance of values. I mean, I remember talking to one of the senior people at Tokyo Marine. We were talking about business and values, and I talked about the Tylenol case and how Johnson & Johnson at that point had gone back to their credo and saved what everybody thought was a dead brand and resurrected it because they were able to communicate that they had the best interests of the customers at heart. Their credo stated that Johnson & Johnson, and they may have gotten away from this recently, but that their first allegiance was to their customers, then their employees, and then their shareholders. And one thing that I guess I'll always remember, I'm talking to a senior executive at Tokyo Marine at a cocktail party, telling him this, and he reaches in his back pocket, pulls out his wallet, pulls out a copy of the Johnson & Johnson Credo, and says, when he and the guy who was preceded him as then president and then chairman were young, they watched Johnson & Johnson handle this crisis, and they said, that's the way organizations should handle it. So I don't think this is a foreign concept to organizations. I just think it's something that has sometimes gotten buried in the pressure for earnings.
Absolutely.
But I also think we were an economy dominated by a few large players. It was a plantation economy, in essence. And I think that really fell apart for us in the 1990s. I mean, we kept looking for replacements, but we kept looking at the big end. What's the big solution? Do we become the Silicon Valley of whatever? We also kept thinking, because we're in the middle of the Pacific, everybody still has to come through us. And so we could use this center of the Pacific argument, and it all stopped working. And the prolonged recession, to me, in the 1990s really sort of knocked our models apart. That's when most of these acquisitions took place, the Lhasa plantations, major plantations, other than Maui closed. And we then have to find our way, which I think we've been trying to do in this century, in a place where we can't have a new Big Five. We don't want a new Big Five. It won't exist anyway. There's no single industry that can save us. So then what is it that Hawaii offers? Why would businesses choose to stay here? Why would you make the choice to move your business here? It's certainly not a cheap cost of living. It goes far more to the kinds of things that Allen was talking about. This is a very unique place on the planet. There are attributes here that exist nowhere else. And that's what, you know, I saw as the opportunity of Enterprise Honolulu, now OEDB, is speak to Hawaii as a very special place. And if you want to embrace this, if you want to feel this place, then by all means come and participate and join. And it will probably end up being, if we can ever say again we're a robust economy, it will be because we're doing a lot of different things, not because we found a magic bullet. The magic bullet, if there is, one's Hawaii. This culture, this place, our people, and we have to find a way to celebrate that and make that the center point of economic development. And that, I think, is kind of what all three of us are saying we were looking for in this shift over, and Pono's involvement, and the new board and all the other people who have supported us.
Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Allen. Thank you, Corbett. Very, very interesting, very thoughtful discussion. Thank you again. And please join us for the second part of our series where we will be discussing using change to move forward. For more information about the Oahu Economic Development Board, and if you'd like to have OEDB come and speak to your company or board, you can contact them through their website, oedb.biz. Aloha.